No, sometimes each wishes it were the other. Hong Kong has China backing it. Singapore has no China backing it. And sometimes we wish we have something at the back to keep us going. I would say Hong Kongers are more bothered by Singapore than Singaporeans by Hong Kong. Because it really doesn't matter to Singapore. There are no more factions in China. They're all Xi Jinping's sub-factions now, right? So when Xi Jinping came to power, when he became 总书记, he said, if you don't tackle corruption, 亡国亡党.
喺睇片之前，大家記得分享、讚好同訂閱灼見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁你就唔會錯過我哋嘅最新影片。
My next question is probably even more sensitive for Hong Kong. Could you compare Singapore and Hong Kong in terms of financial, economic power, and give a non-diplomatic answer as to how Hong Kong should improve its position? What policies, very briefly, Hong Kong should adopt?
No, sometimes each wishes it were the other. Hong Kong has China backing it. Singapore has no China backing it. And sometimes we wish we have a Zushan, something at the back to keep us going. But we don't. Hong Kong has China, and China will never abandon Hong Kong. So that sets a base for Hong Kong. But it means that you're part of a Chinese system. It means that you do not have sovereignty, which Singapore enjoys. So there's a price for everything, and each has the strengths of its weakness.
Well, the IPO is so low. Look at Hong Kong.
No, right now the Americans want to make a point that you introduce national security law, you must pay a price, and they discourage funds from investing in Chinese stock, including Hong Kong stock. So we're all affected, including AIA, of which I'm a director. But think about it. Does China lack capital? China doesn't lack capital. FDI has fallen. Has it affected China? It hasn't affected China. It's affected China in terms of networks and knowledge. So that's part of the Americans trying to deny China knowledge, which enable it to progress faster. And the deep fears are military. So if you see, Hong Kong has to accept that in the end, let's say America completely decouples from Hong Kong and you lose 20%. But what's the future? The future is still Europe, Southeast Asia, India, the rest of the world. That will not destroy Hong Kong. Hong Kong still has a bright future, even without America. But of course, better with America.
I want to ask you, Mr. Yeo, about the rivalry and competition between Hong Kong and Singapore. Some of my mentees told me recently, because they have a lot of contacts with Singaporeans, and they said Singapore is very, very keen to squash Hong Kong because Singapore wants to be number one. And now, of course, you've surpassed Hong Kong in some aspects. Is this your understanding that now your government, your people are very keen to see, because now we are very, not sick, but we have a lot of trouble. So is it a good opportunity for Singapore to see, now Singapore will rise to the very top and Hong Kong will never be number one again?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I would say Hong Kongers are more bothered by Singapore than Singaporeans by Hong Kong. Yeah. Because it really doesn't matter to Singapore. But Hong Kong feels it much more keenly. And I say this without emotion because I'm on both sides. So I can sense this for myself. People in Singapore don't talk very much about Hong Kong. People in Singapore are blue, not yellow. Overwhelmingly blue.
Also, like your reference early on in your speech, talk about the Cambridge and Oxford. I think that certainly is good metaphor, or refer to these two cities, right?
No,
is that what you mean?
No. I think the reason is because Hong Kongers feel a sense of insecurity, and that causes them to look at Singapore as perhaps a reason for the insecurity.
Yeah.
I don't think Singapore has anything to do with it.
So good to see you in Hong Kong, George. I have a few questions, but can I ask you, what is the biggest worries you have for China? I mean, China has been in pretty dim light in the Western media. Thank you.
John Fairbanks years ago described China as a bureaucratic state. It's governed by a meritocracy, selected through examinations. These are scholar mandarins. When the system works well, it's awesome. The key is to prevent corruption and self-serving behavior. So corruption is an inseparable part of Chinese culture because of Confucius. Giving gifts is part of relationship. So every year, for Chinese New Year, think of the number of red envelopes for Lai Si, Think of all the stresses on women in China. Why do you do this? To transfer piddling amounts of money. It's to establish relationships. And beyond a point, the gift becomes corruption. So you can never get rid of corruption in Chinese society. And people are always looking at Guanxi, who knows whom and so on. If you go the direct route, you're likely to get a no. But if you go through a father or a brother or a friend or someone who's done a favor, then you can get a yes. This is throughout Chinese society. So Xi Jinping, to me, is a great man because no one believed that he could have tackled corruption the way he did. When I was a visiting scholar after I lost the elections in Peking University, I gave a speech at the Guofang Daxue, the National Defense University, and I met the Major General. In the private meeting, he said, 中国没有希望了. China has no hope. He didn't explain to me. I could see the sadness and despair in his eyes. Later, I realized promotions were being bought in China. The higher you are, the more you have to pay. This is like the end of the Qing dynasty. And the corruption was everywhere. It was egregious. If you say, well, I'll give $100 million, they say, what do you take me for? It became blatant among the princelings. So when Xi Jinping came to power, when he became Zhong Shu Ji, they said, if you don't tackle corruption, Wang Guo Wang Tang. No one believed him. They thought it was just platitudinous words. But when he became 国家主席, went after Zhou Yongkang, Bo Xilai, Lin Jihua, with the military behind him, and then turned around to go after the PLA. And more recently, after the Communist Party Youth League. There are no more factions in China. They're all Xi Jinping sub-factions now, right? No one believed he could have done this. Can you imagine if corruption had not gotten better but gotten worse since, say, 2013? Where would China be today? That would be the China the Indo-Pacific Command would love. That China they can always handle, no problem, you see. But this China, where corruption has to be discreet and in the shadows, that is a dangerous China for them.
Well, certainly that for some people, President Xi is a controversial or complicated figure, but I would say he is also the most consequential leader at this moment.
So my answer to your question is, what is the greatest worry? Is the corruption index. If corruption index goes up in China, then it's the beginning of a long decline.
Based on what you said, do you think that he saved the Chinese Communist Party 10 years ago, 11 years ago?
I think he saved China.
鍾意名家分析，記得俾 like 同埋分享，支持同訂閱卓見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁就唔會錯過我哋嘅新片。